Yes, we welcome you and assure you of the same support that we have given the previous CS. We will work with you and ensure that we deliver, because for us it's a privilege and an honor to serve the nation, our great nation. So with those few remarks, I will want to now give the opportunity to Professor Njuguna to make his remarks, and then after that he can hand over his report to the new CS, and then give the new CS opportunity to address us, and then I'll finish with a small gift that we have to Professor Njuguna. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much indeed. You forgot to say that we come a long way with the PS. We started in central bank and moved mountains. We've been joined by another central banker whom I trained, even seconded in MEFMU, isn't it?
Yes.
So you can see that is the family is still building. And there was also my monetary policy operations guy. He's there. So Treasury has been supported very much. But because I wanted to make sure, as I make some, should I say, handover notes, I should also make a few comments. Those comments are actually based on the experiences I've had so far. Just about 5 or so comments. And I start off with what PS started off, the new CS, John Mbadi. We have met with John Mbadi in so many of my life, especially in the central bank. You know, that I had to report to you and to the committee those days. But then I wanted to just state that in the last 22 months or so, the National Treasury and Economic Planning struggled extremely well to sustain stability in the economy due to layers of persistent shocks, and they were also negative and persistent. And there were also inconsistencies in terms of internal policies. And these outcomes had significant effects, some of which include, for example, if you look at my works before I even joined here, I talked about dual shocks. We actually showed that in the African continent and this region, the Horn of Africa, it reversed poverty reduction efforts by 20 years. It also reversed efforts of fighting inequality by over 20 years. For example, the drought itself had more devastating consequences in terms of inequality. And because of that, government became the main driver of the economy. Remember, there were times during the global financial crisis, we actually argued that if you want to be the only game in town, you'll be the only game in town, but it will not last long. The government became the main driver, and obviously an extreme Dutch disease condition just emerged. And the symptoms of a Dutch disease phenomena is private sector crowding out stories, very, very extensive in Kenya. Heavy investment in public investment, especially in infrastructure, raises the non-tradable prices, and obviously nominal exchange rate was not allowed to be the automatic stabilizer. And obviously you know what has happened. The second point I wanted to mention is that debt levels and debt burden cannot be sustained by the current revenues. And we are familiar with it. Bernard kept on reminding us that we are running so fast to remain in the same position, but one day we may stumble. So it means that we have to actually deal with it and deal with the patterns of expenditures. Let me give you examples. Total revenues stand at about 16.5% of GDP. And the target for this 2024 was actually 18.6%, with the finance bill that is not there. So it means that those revenues may not be realized. The second thing is that expenditures range around 22.1%. So you can see the gap, isn't it? From the word go, you're already set to have a fiscal gap, which is quite unsurmountable. The tax expenditures, that is what we wanted to deal with in the current fiscal year, stand at 2.94%. Just imagine if you were to reduce those tax expenditure by even 2%, it will add to a very big margin of saving revenues. So the short-term debt, and especially bills and bonds, have created a massive liquidity challenge in the country. That is why I used to tell Bernard that sometimes we took up to 3 weeks to clear the payroll, isn't it? Because of that liquidity challenge. But it is not a solvency problem. It is not a solvency problem. But what I would encourage my dear friend here, UCS John Mbadi, that these liquidity constraints requires strategic options to avoid them creating a solvency challenge. This requires a very strong signaling approach. The third point I wanted to make is the cost of living and high taxation debate are just symptoms of two facts in the country. First, poverty and inequality after layers of negative shocks have persisted. So what we hear is actually not high cost of living or even taxation. It's actually poverty that has hit the country so hard after so many layers of negative shocks. And the second point, the second fact is unemployment, especially with the youth. So the government worked on the production and productivity in food production space, and food prices declined drastically. The second, the government created and developed the G2G petroleum products purchases, which was a very, very important PPP, and especially coming in during the global dollar shortage period, and fuel prices declined. That's why, Mheshimiwa, you found me defending this very much, because I know the results. Since we managed G2G, there is no oil importing company that has gone to commercial banks to buy dollars. So the success is not to be seen as declining fuel prices, but actually creating a different market for foreign exchange, depending on the foreign exchange buying when at the retail level was creating a distortion in the market. So fuel prices declined. However, this was not seen as enough. The following would supplement these efforts as we move to the full implementation of bottom-up economic transformation agenda. First, a strategy to generate employment through domestic manufacturing and export. This is something that we are really working on, and the better, that is the bottom-up economic transformation agenda has put this framework very clearly. Second, industrial and agricultural policies driven and joined together by value chain approach will produce the superior outcomes that we are looking for. I'll be reading these notes behind my dear friend, because anytime you have any problem with my language, you can always ask me. I of course, for those who have gone through and who have been unfortunate to be in my class, they know the language that I talk. But the most important thing is that this is the policy space we are talking about. Then the fourth point I wanted to make is that there has been important developments initiatives that have been ongoing at the National Treasury and Economic Planning, and I would require support to generate the required results. First, tax policy and tax instruments review study supported by the Danish government, and that is Danida itself is an agency of Danish government. This study was a 3-year study. It was funded to the tune of $2.5 million by the Danish government through Danida office here. And it is going to be critical for Kenya to reform the tax policies. And the objective is to raise the tax base and the tax effort to the region of 22 to 25%. I was reminding everyone that when I joined the central bank in 2007, tax to GDP was 22%. I personally argued during the East African Community meeting that the convergence criteria in the East African region should be 25%. We were at 22%. Although the GDP was rebased in, I think, is it in 2014? Yeah? Yes. Yeah, 2014. It was not significant in terms of reducing the tax effort. But I came to the Treasury, Mheshimiwa John Mbadi, to realize that the tax to GDP ratio, or what we call tax effort, had declined from 22 to 13.7% without any structural change. So that is devastating. So that is why this study is very, very important to bring us back to where we are. But what do we need to do? One of them is to run away from this notion that high tax rates will raise high tax revenue. The reality is the opposite. don't want to mention who drives us there, but there are so many colleagues here to tell you exactly what we need to do. Because high taxes cannot bring you high tax revenue, what do we need to do? We need to study how we can optimize each tax instrument. In this study, this is a 3-year study, by the way. We have done the first year, and Albert has been monitoring this. The second year and the third year, we are even bringing in experimental design works. We need to understand how the informal market works. And if we understand how informal market works, how can we raise taxes in the informal market without distorting the market? What do we want to do? We want to come up with a tax policy that is predictable in terms of revenue, that is predictable in terms of the manufacturing sector and the production sector. That is, they know that taxes will not continue to change periodically, but it also does not distort the market. And that is something that is very clear.